So good day. I hope you all had a good meal. We definitely did. So yeah. So it's when you I always find when seeing people coming doing something wholesome like generosity sort of brings a smile myself because I look at the news and you lose hope in humankind if you just looked at the news and thought that was it. But when you seeing these good people doing good things, it brings that sense of mudita to the mind. When you see people doing things that are wholesome and good, and yes, I think I have a different world view than maybe the people who just look at the news all the time. Because I see a lot of good things and people doing wholesome good things. So it's discussion time. I'll come to your question in a little while. I'll just see if anybody has any other questions. Yes.
You were there at the beginning of Cittaviveka?
I was. Well, not as not as a novice or a monk, but as a layperson. Because the monastery Chithurst was started in 1979, and so I was connected to the Sangha then, but I didn't actually arrive there at Chithurst till 1982. So even though I was visiting as a layman, I didn't actually join the Sangha till 1982. So it's 40 years this year, 40 years.
What is the purpose of a monastery, Ajahn?
Well, it's in more the forest tradition to have a place in nature where people can train in the monastic training. Training what we say the higher sila, the higher samadhi, and the higher wisdom. Yeah. So living under the Vinaya in a suitable place in nature, very conducive conditions for cultivating the higher virtue, the higher meditation, say, and the higher wisdom. Because maybe in the towns and cities there's lots of distractions and things to distract one from just being focused on more the meditative life. But nature is very conducive, very peaceful environments. The green of nature, the rhythms of nature are very peaceful. So they support the cultivation of meditation and support the keeping of the virtue. So that's the benefit in terms of the training for monks and nuns. For the lay community, a place where they can come, and a peaceful place where they can see people practicing the Buddha's teachings, and hopefully a good example of those people who practice the Buddha's teachings. They can hear, practice generosity, listen to Dhamma teachings, practice meditation. So that supports the lay community in their spiritual aspirations. So the lay community support us on a material level, providing the basic requisites for living, and the Sangha support the lay people in terms of encouragement and advice in terms of spiritual development, the cultivation of bhavana, meditation and wisdom. And people really value monasteries or places where people actually really live into a high standard of virtue, and the Sangha represent a high level of virtue. And when people practice in a certain place and they are really practicing the Buddha's teaching, it creates a certain peaceful atmosphere, which does help people to feel more calm and relaxed if they have very stressful and challenging lives in the lay lives. So being around the monastery environment, meditating in the meditation halls, chanting, listening to Dhamma can be very supportive for the lay community. I mean, it's different for different people. It really depends on how much defilement you have. If you have a lot of defilement, it's going to be hard at first. But yeah, so it's different for different people.
Understand that there are 227 rules for monks.
Yes, yeah.
I don't expect you to tell us all of them, but is there some that you could share so that we know what they are or what it could be?
Well, I mean, I think probably the things to be aware of is the more important things around, the more heavier rules, like the Parajika and Sanghadisesa, in terms of, harming, killing, taking life, stealing. Of course, the monk also means celibacy. Oh yeah, those are naturally built into the Vinaya, yeah. But then there's the more refined rules about not over-demanding of the lay people, unless you really need something, not going around, get me this, get me that, get me the best of this, get me the best of that, And there's rules around that. Rules around, relating to lay people as well, especially with women, for the monks and for the nuns, the way they relate to men. So just the Vinaya is just to support the spiritual training of the monks and nuns. Yeah.
Then how far from your temple to Amavati, and how often you meet Ajahn Sumedho?
Well, in recent last couple of years, not so often because of the pandemic. And they had an outbreak at Amavati. We were going to go, and Luang Por was going to come to Chithurst, but there was an outbreak at Amavati, so there hasn't been as much coming and going as usual. Now it's changing now, things are relaxing now. On a good day, if you leave at 5 o'clock in the morning, it's an hour and a half drive. Yeah.
Similar from here to Sunshine Coast.
Something like that, yes, yeah. But you don't have the M25. We have this, you have to go on the M25, and sometimes that 1.5 hours turns into 3 hours. The reputation of the M25 is the biggest car park in Europe. So on a clear, that's why we leave at 5 in the morning, clear run and get there in an hour and a half, yeah. So it's not so far. It's just next door by Australian standards, isn't it?
So Amavati was established after the Chitta.
Yes, Amavati, we first moved into Amavati in 1984, so 5 years after Chithurst, yeah. Because what happened at Chithurst is there was a lot of people became interested in becoming monks and nuns, and it got too crowded. And so Luang Por decided we'd probably have to find a place, to accommodate more monks and nuns, and also something maybe to support. A lot of people wanted to come to the monastery to do like retreats and things, or join in the monastic community. So a place where also you could have like a meditation center. And so this Amavati, the school, it was an old school, Amavati. It came up for sale. And it had these long sort of wooden buildings. And the people who initially made an offer for it were the people who had the chicken, the chicken batteries. They wanted to make it into chicken farm, awful thing, And but the council didn't want that. There was already one down the road. And so we but the English Sangha Trust were able to purchase this school, and just over the years now I've been trying to convert it more into a monastery, new buildings, building a Dhamma hall, and improving the accommodation. I have lots of tales about the old days of Dhammavati. The first winter there was, whoa. Yeah, we see when it was built at a time when oil was very cheap. So it had a big oil burning thing which pumped water to all these pipes to all the buildings. But when the Sangha moved in, we didn't have the funds to keep the oil going because it was so expensive. So we had to stop the oil heating. And you know the buildings, these wooden buildings, there was no insulation. There was just the inner wall board and the outer. There was no insulation. So it just became freezing. So I used to live next door to a monk who's now the abbot in Italy, Ajahn Chah, and he became known as Chanda Plummo because he learned how to do plumbing. And I was next door to him. I hear people knocking on his door at night saying a pipe has burst because it's freeze and burst. And people would wake up in puddles because there was some sinks in people's rooms then. And he'd wake up and there was a flooding. So he had to go and turn off the water and do the fixing. And these big heating pipes explode in the night. You hear explosions where they burst apart and all the black from the pipes would splatter all over the wall. So it was a challenging first winter there until we got a better heating system. It's quite comfortable now. It's changed a lot. But it was good for the practice, good to endure a bit of cold. And I really learned. When I first went there, in my first months, I didn't like the cold. And I was quite, averse towards the cold. But I had to get used to it because it was, a lot of the time you felt cold. But it was interesting that when I began to accept the feeling of feeling cold more, it didn't feel so cold anymore. Yeah, it was really, and I seemed to even tolerate the body seemed to do better with the cold. So it was interesting, that experience, because as a layman I always used to gravitate towards the fire, the gas fire, and sit in front of that and meditate in front of that and whatever, But I did learn to bear with the cold a bit more, and became more peaceful with the feeling of being cold. Yeah.
Has the advent of the internet affected the Sangha over the years? You would be the pre-internet and the post-internet.
Yes, I was. Yeah.
Has it benefited it or created problems?
Well, I mean, obviously these things create more complexity. I mean, it's just, but you just have to adapt to conditions, We at Chithurst, we resisted it for quite a few years. In fact, until maybe just a few years ago, we only had like a 0.6 megabyte download at the monastery. Can you imagine what that is like? Because we were so far away that the internet wasn't very good. Then we upgraded to a mobile connection. But in these days, for different things, you need internet to do certain things. But of course, in terms of the Sangha, we have certain restrictions about internet usage, especially for the junior people, So that's what we do. We just have certain times when people can access things on the internet, do emails and things like that. But now, of course, with the pandemic and more and more meetings online and Zoom teachings, we've had to upgrade again just to be able to, do more the sort of things, streaming teachings and things. But it's at some level of complexity. But that's one has to adapt to the times. And, yeah.
So it is not like a very deep and philosophical question, but for kids, how we can optimize their focus and concentration in a Buddhist point of view?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think as parents, it's like steering your attention of your children to things that are wholesome and things that are going to have a wholesome effect on their mental health and things. So I think that's because definitely you see there are things that are not going to have a good effect on kids, and some things that will have a good effect. So that's what we have to try and do. And I don't think we can perfect in terms of there are certain things that are going to get subjected to. We can't protect them from everything, but just try and steer best we can to the more wholesome things that are going to have a good effect on our young people. I was just listening to somebody. It's like a mental health program that's on the BBC, and the statistics in the UK now is that 1 in 6 young people have mental health issues. 1 in 6. That's the latest statistics. So all this sort of interesting, I think, with all the development and all these things available, everyone should be happy. You know, all the entertainment you want, just like that, and every this and that, but the results is not. So I think people are learning now what's more useful, and what's becoming more popular in the UK is mindfulness, and like the teaching mindfulness in schools, and it's just learning how to. It's not like meditation on the breath or anything, but just how to help our young people just to focus on more wholesome things that have a more calming effect and focusing effect. So there's definitely concern in the UK about the mental health of our young people. Yeah.
Actually, how can they control their anger?
Mm?
The young people,
Yes.
is there any way that help how to control their anger?
Well, I think while they're angry, just keep peaceful in ourselves. But maybe after you can talk to them about it. You know, how did it feel for you, and how did you feel after? Just to help them to reflect a bit. Has it been a benefit? But when people are in the anger, it's difficult to talk to them. It's when they're more after they calm down that maybe you can talk a bit about it. But again, you know, I mean, it's part of human nature to get angry from time to time, generally for people. So it's not. It does happen. So I think if we tell people don't be angry, that doesn't help, you know, because sometimes we get angry, but it's more asking to understand the nature of anger and is it going to be a benefit? Because if we do tend to follow that mind state, it tends to increase over the years, and then the slightest thing can trigger us off, you know, and that's not a happy way to live. If you're always reacting to things with anger, you know, it's not happiness, is it? It's suffering. Yeah. And I think in like maybe in Thai society, you know, it's not seen as very good to be angry. But what can happen is people repress it, and then it blows up because people don't deal with it properly. They tend to repress it because you shouldn't be angry, you know. So you repress, and then it can cause problems later. So just, you know, even if you feel angry, you know, just go and shout outside at nature or something, just to let it out a bit. But you know, just sometimes we have to sort of get it off the, you know, we say "rabaya rom," don't we, in Thai? Let off the steam. Mm.
The nature of anger, that would be helpful to let it lie and go away.
Yeah, it's just to learn how to manage it. Yeah, to be with it, not to judge it, but say this is the angry mind. Just bear with it; it'll pass. You know, and try not to act or speak on it. Just to be patient with it. That's why the Buddha said patience is the great practice for dealing with anger. Being patient. Because maybe anger is sometimes because of our lack of impatience anyway. things are not going according to our wishes, so we can get angry, can't we? Yeah, and yeah.
The only thing I see the dangers when we are angry, Bhante, is if we can't see our actions or be mindful of our actions, how often the bad consequence can be,
Yes.
like
Yeah.
with kids, if we don't teach them, then they cannot control, they will do silly stuff,
Mm.
which will be in regret later on. Or
Yeah.
kids, even adults, if that's the things that I'm really scared about.
Mm.
Even myself, if I'm in the danger
Mm.
and angry and I can't see, if I'm not mindful, it can be very bad too.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. But so we have to develop the skillful means to help teach our children, and also skillful means for ourselves. Yeah. But there's a little poem I read. This is in a book called the Book of Virtues, and it's not a Buddhist book. But it says, anger in its time and place may assume a sort of grace, but it must have reason in it. But it must have reason in it and not last beyond a minute. Otherwise, I'm forgetting the whole poem, but that was the sort of gist of it. But it must have reason in it and not last beyond a minute. If the further length it goes into malice, it does grow. Yeah, that's a sort of a poem about. So, if we're practicing Dhamma, we just have to know the things that tend to trigger it off, and maybe the causes and the conditions behind that. What things tend to trigger it off. And that can teach us about our own attachments and our own desires about certain things.
Is there such a thing as righteous anger?
Well, I think righteous compassion is probably a better response, I think. Yeah, I don't. Yeah. Righteous anger still will lead to a sense of, will have good effects on our well-being.
Righteous compassion would still be a deviation away from equanimity, though, wouldn't it?
I think it would be supportive of eventually coming to equanimity. Many years ago, Luang Por Sumedho gave a very good talk, because we had a monk stay in the monastery who had a lot of righteous anger, And he'd come from Thailand, and things weren't exactly in the monastery in England like they were in Thailand, so he would get quite angry about certain ways we do things. So Luang Por Sumedho gave this very good talk. It was called Righteous View and Right View, and the difference between the two. Very good talk he gave. Mm.
Righteous would be eye making.
Excuse me?
Righteous is I and righteous.
Righteous view is, this shouldn't be like this. Right view is, this is the way it is. How can I adapt to it? Righteous is, it shouldn't be like this, should be like that, should be like that. Yeah.
Ajahn mentioned Luang Por Sumedho, which reminds me of one of his favorite that I like very much when we talk about a lot of time when we are angry, I think it's a frustration of things not going our way.
Yes, exactly.
We want something to be different.
Yes, right.
It is like this.
Yeah.
And he was talking about peaceful coexistence with the unpleasant.
Yes, yeah.
Which is a beautiful way of
Right, yeah.
to be expressed in anger.
Yeah. But he always taught us too, if you angry, just learn to be with it. Don't try to repress it or think you shouldn't have it. But just know this is the way it is. This is anger, you know. But then just learn how to deal with it, not act or speak on it. Yeah. If you do act or speak on it, then begin again.
You mentioned all the bad news there is, particularly at the moment. How, from a Buddhist point of view, should we react to bad news? Should we even be aware of it, or should we be aware of it and practice mindfulness over it? What's the best way of coping?
I think it's okay to be aware of it, but just be aware of your responses to it. If you're getting if it's leading to anger, anxiety and things like this, then be careful, If it's... thing is with the news, it doesn't tend to bring compassion to the mind, It tends to want to trigger off strong emotions and I think it's created a lot of not very wholesome mind states for people, the fear, all the sort of things, and the fear, the paranoia, the anger or anxiety, and so that's something to be careful of. And try to not get caught into unwholesome mind states when you read it. And but it's all really sensational stuff, isn't it? That's what the news tends to report. It's like in wars, it always tells you about, the things that are going to trigger off more emotion, don't they? They report about children, things happening to children. And, these things happen. This is war, when there's war, these things happen. But they play more on these sort of more sensational happenings to trigger off more emotion. And they're not often, it won't trigger off skillful emotions, won't it, when you hear about children being blown up, things like that.
How would we cope with the depression that often follows these bad news and these terrible events?
Well, I think it's good to remember there are good people doing good things in the world and try to focus more on that.
Is this a manifestation of spiritual warfare? Things are happening at the moment?
Well, this is the nature of this realm that we live in. In the time of the Buddha there were wars. You had all these enlightened beings around, you had the Buddha there, but people still had wars, It's the nature of this realm. And I think as Buddhists, what we maybe try and do is not to add to the negativity and the hatred, and try to cultivate more the Brahma Viharas, bring those sort of mind thoughts into the world to support the growth of wholesome conditions. If we're just getting caught up in anger and hatred towards the people who are doing these bad things, then we're just adding to the negativity in the world. But if we can bring more thoughts of compassion, kindness. There are some people really, like in England, people are now looking after refugees and things and doing, generous, donating things. So some people, are responding very well to the situation and helping people. Let's come to these questions. Yes, there's a question about like a newborn baby seems, is quite exhibits a sort of purity. Yeah? And like the Buddha said, you don't have to give precepts to a baby, because they don't hurt anybody, they don't take anything but mother's milk, and they're faithful, no sexual misconduct, and just they don't tell lies, but they just cry a bit now and again, and they don't take intoxicants. So naturally virtuous, yeah. So they sort of manifest a sort of purity, yeah, which we like to see. We love the beautiful. It brings up something very wholesome when we see such this purity, doesn't it? Yeah. But in terms of Dhamma, if people didn't have defilements, they wouldn't be born. So even though they're not manifesting, then they're underneath. And it's just like maybe the sort of the impurities in the water can sink to the bottom, and the water looks quite pure, but there's this dirt on the bottom. But of course, when things get stirred up, and it arises again. They call these latent tendencies, anusaya, in the Buddha's teachings. People are born because of defilements, and these lay low for a while, but then they start to manifest with time. So this is nature. But if we didn't have defilements, no birth. If we go back, And
how do you eradicate all the anusaya?
through mindfulness and wisdom. As they arise, if you're mindful and wise, you let them go. And that's a purification process.
So we've got to wait until they arrive.
Well, you don't have to wait very long, actually. Just like a child, all of a sudden, I want this, give me this, I want this. And I think it's good to, one thing I think about, maybe commenting on the development of the intellect and the thinking mind, Like when you see young children play, they can fall out, have a bit of a clash, one can cry even, but then 2 minutes later they can be playing together again. Because they don't do the thinking, they don't hold on to things through their thinking mind. They haven't developed that. It's just an unpleasantness for a moment, but they don't hold on to it through their thoughts. They don't think, he did this, and he did that, and he did this. But of course, we get older, we develop this thinking mind, then it's that person did this, we remember it 20 years later. We carry these things around, Where a child doesn't do that. They can just fall out 1 minute and be playing happily together the next minute. So this is the conditioning process that we go through from birth. And, we're conditioned by, the values we're brought up with, the environment. And different, like in different countries, there's different types of conditioning too. And part of the practice of being more aware is to be aware of our conditioning. Because if we're not aware of it, we think that's the way it should be, the highest truth. So this is like Luang Por Chah would give lots of good examples about to be aware of our conditioning, how we're conditioned by different things, by our society. So one of the examples I remember from Luang Por Chah was like the general who comes to see him, a Thai general. Now in Thai society, of course, you don't touch on the head, do you? That's conventional, and it's seen as an insult to touch somebody on the head. Now, that's a conventional thing in Thai society, but it's not ultimate truth, is it? If you touch somebody on the head in Australia, probably nobody would bother, would they? But you see, it's the conditioning of that society. So that's samuti satya, you could call that conditioning, yeah? But of course, the same general will go to Luang Por Chah and say, Luang Por, please touch me on the head, because from the monk it's a blessing, But if a layman, ordinary person, touched the general on the head, he could have him shot, So, whoa, So you see how, because of that conditioning, we respond to things in a certain way. So that's what to be aware of in our awareness, just to be aware how we're conditioned by the society and things around us to see things in a certain way. So, when a Buddhist sees a Buddha statue, good feeling, isn't it? When, say, a fundamentalist Christian sees the Buddha statue, but the Buddha statue itself, it's empty. It's just a statue. But it's what we give to it through our conditioning. If we're brought up as a Buddhist with lots of respect for the Buddha, then our condition is to see that Buddha brings, happiness. But if you're brought up, all other religions, the work of the devil, then of course, then there's a negative reaction to it, isn't there? So these are the convention, the way our mind's conditioned to respond to things in a certain way by our society and our upbringing. But this is what we have to see into. If you find yourself reacting to a certain thing in a certain way, why is that? The other person doesn't seem to be bothered by it. So this is so there's the conventional reality, and the ultimate reality is really everything is really empty of anything substantial, but it's the value it's the value we give to them. It's the value we give to a Buddha statue, to somebody touching us on the head. So the wise person, if one's in tune with what is just conventional reality and doesn't see it as ultimate reality, then whether people touch on the head or whatever, it won't bother you. You'll be at peace with that. So like, if somebody touched Luang Por Jan on the head, I don't think he wouldn't bother, because he's seen through it as conventions. Yeah, just a conventional reality. He used to joke too. He said, if you make chicken poo the currency, the local currency, he said, then people will be fighting over chicken poo. But it's the value you give something. But conventions are useful. But you have to see how we have to know them for what they are. So, of course, like in England, you drive on the right side of the road, that's convention. But if you cling to that convention and drive in France, you're going to have a problem. Yeah, so to know time and place and know conventions. But if you cling to a certain convention in another place, it could be a big problem. Yeah. So this is what we learn through meditation, is to be aware of our conditioning. But there's skillful conditioning too. And what I see, like in places like Thailand, and I've been to Sri Lanka as well, the generosity there is, in the whole, they're brought up, doing dana, and you see the results of that is people are a lot happier, a lot more smiles and things, because they're brought up with this sort of generosity. So that's that sort of good conditioning, you see. And they love to give, to offer things. I think in Asian, in all of Asian societies, I see that. Yeah. But in the West, fortunately, sometimes we don't have those opportunities, and then we all these advertisements about you got to get this, you got to get that. So people always think about what I need for me. They haven't brought up that sort of seeing a monk in arms around in the morning, putting a bit of food in the bowl, but the results of that is very wholesome and leads to a lot of happiness in people. So that's good conditioning to see the joy in giving. Yeah.
You mentioned the Christian perspective on the Buddha statues. The Buddha image is just an empty statue. What is the merit of making prostrations?
Yeah. Well, we can use, so we can give something of value, but see, it's not ultimate truth. But when we look at a Buddha statue represents the Buddha represents somebody who lived a very wholesome life, who was very wise. So it reminds us about certain qualities. And I always say, when you bow to the Buddha, you're inclining towards wisdom. You're making that physical inclining. And to body, speech and mind. So from the point of the head is like the body, and so the mouth, throat and the heart are all inclining towards the Buddha. Body, speech and mind. Inclining towards wisdom, awakening. The Buddha represents wisdom and awakening. So, this is how we can use these symbols. But maybe not everybody. But again, the thing is, sometimes with a conventional thing, people don't understand why they're doing it. Just do it because the parents did it. But in the West, we tend to reflect more why we do these things and the benefits of it. And when we understand why we're doing it, and we can use this convention very skillfully to establish more wholesomeness in our minds and hearts. Yeah. So that it's just a way we can use these different symbols and conventions. They can have a wholesome effect. So, yeah. And when in 1980, I went on a pilgrimage to first I started in Thailand. This was before I was a monk. Went to Thailand, then Burma, then India, and I saw a lot of Buddha statues. And it really made me feel happy seeing all these Buddha statues. So on the last stop in India, I bought one. And then when I went back to my flat I was working in London, I made a shrine in my flat, and it was really nice to have a place in the Buddha statue for sitting meditation. Yeah, because I saw the good effect having a Buddha statue had on the mind. Yeah.
On the same point, Ajahn, we see when we travel, like maybe non-Buddhist houses and so on, people tend to keep Buddha statues in gardens and
Yeah.
places, I think, probably due to the calmness.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, you see in these garden centres now Buddha statues in England, anyway. Yeah, these sort of Buddha statues. The thing is not to, because some people might react to seeing a Buddha statue on the floor. Again, that's conditioning, isn't it? You shouldn't put a Buddha statue on the floor, But we have to learn not to react to that, For some people, they don't. But they like having the statue because of it has a peaceful presence. Yeah.
On the same point, Ajahn, is it also correct to think that paying respect to the Buddha also creates good karma?
Yeah, well, it's respecting something wholesome, wisdom, isn't it? Buddha represents wisdom. So when you pay respects to a Buddha statue, you're inclined towards wisdom. You're respecting wisdom.
Is there a danger of attachment?
One can get attached, but it's more seen as a more skillful attachment. But eventually, we have to let go of that. But there's attachments that can be supportive for a while. But if we're attached to it, then it will lead to some suffering. If we're attached to the Buddha statue and things, when we see a Buddha statue being misused, then we can get a bit upset. So you have to be careful about it. Too much attachment can lead to a negative reaction if something different happens to that thing we're attached to. Yeah.
I'm still not clear about my questions, and I'm still not satisfied. Sorry.
Yes?
Is it because we've been, keep reborn into this world, and we keep using the conditional kind of environment and everything around us for so many lifetimes. So that's why it's printed in our brain or in our mind. Is it because of that? That's why it's so difficult for us to purify our mind to see the truth of the thing as they are, or the ultimate truth. Is it because of that reason, or why do we have to take so long to purify our mind to see, as Buddha said, things as they are?
Well, you look at Paticca Samuppada, ignorance is the cause of birth, not seeing things clearly, not seeing things in the wrong way, avijja. And avijja, part of the reason we don't see things clearly is because of hindrances like desire, aversion, restlessness, doubts, sloth and torpor. So these colour, so we don't see things clearly. And this brings about ignorance. Now, if in this life we free the heart from these hindrances, then that allays the ignorance, and then we see the truth of things, and then we can go beyond suffering and birth and death. But we're born because we have these latent tendencies, anusaya. So.
It means that we still, because we still use the language or the normal, the labels that we use to help us in a conventional way.
Yeah. Yeah, we can use them, but we tend to get attached to them. And we have to see through the attachment to them. And just see that they're just conditioned phenomena. So if we're like, you probably lived in the West now, but if somebody touched you on the head, would you get angry with them? It depends. So there's some conditioning still there. Yeah. Now, if you're not attached to convention, it wouldn't bother you. But because we have this conditioning, and that's through attachment. You see, that's attachment. So that's what we have to see through. Somebody touched the Buddha on the head, he wouldn't bat an eyelid, as they say. Because in effect, it can be an affectionate thing. Oh, you're such a nice person, The intention can be quite friendly, can't it? Yeah.
I was just thinking about, just now this gentleman asked about, we bow to the Buddha statue. I feel, as an Asian, like for us, head is the highest part of the body,
Mm-hmm.
which is supposed to be the most respected part.
Yes.
And I think when I bow to the Buddha, you bring your head down to the mantra.
Yes.
And it's a very good way to bring out humility.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Of this teaching, and so grateful for what is behind. So that's what I feel.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Yes.
Ajahn, I also think bowing is very good. It's a good exercise.
Lots of benefits for mind and body. Yeah. Yeah.
Still trying to connect the latent tendency and the conditioning or convention that we are talking about. So if we could see it through the conditioning, does it mean the latent tendency also weakens, or?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So the idea is to completely purify ourselves. You've got to completely have no more latent tendency to awaken.
Yeah, the latent tendency is like desire, aversion. So, over time we learn to recognize these tendencies and to let go of them. And, initially maybe they can be quite strong, maybe. But we lessen them and eventually we can go beyond them.
So we don't have to wait until it arrives. It disappears because we understand conditioning.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not waiting for it to arise and then you
Oh, no, you have to.
meditate on it and let each one that comes out
Yeah.
evaporate.
Well, we cultivate mindfulness and wisdom, so when they do arise, we can learn how to understand them and let them go. But we only can know them when they arise, So, it's just when they do arise, we know how to deal with them skillfully, know them for what they are.
Is that true that if you can see through the conditional world by removing anatta or by removing I
Mhm.
from that?
Right.
So that's what it will help you to go through to see things as they are without I attached to your view or your thought. Am I
Yeah, well,
correct?
yeah. Because the I, the sense of attachment to the I am is a tendency. Actually a child doesn't really have a sense of I am yet, does it? It arises later, doesn't it? It just is, But the sense of I am arises later. It's a latent tendency. Well, I mean, our Western conditioning is about me and mine, isn't it? It's a different conditioning. But until people really see the disadvantage of having a big ego, then nothing you can do. But if they begin to see the disadvantage of having a big ego and the suffering involved, then maybe then you can give them the tools to lessen it. Yeah, but they have to see it for themselves, don't they? It's, I mean, interesting now, you just look at the media as well, these sort of superstars, very wealthy. Oh, there's so much suffering they have, don't they? Yeah, and then even something like a successful sports person, you know, it's great when they're winning, but when they start to lose, the suffering they have, you know, like Mr. Djokovic in Australia. But, you know, this is the convention, you know, all fame, fortune, but it doesn't last, and it doesn't, you know, ultimately it's suffering. And that's what everybody's aiming for, isn't it? You know, wealth, power, you know, for, you know, they think it's going to make them happy, you know.
In the society, the new age society, in the old days, if you ask children what they want to be policemen, firemen, or farmer, or teacher.
Yeah.
But some kids are saying that they want to be famous.
Yeah, well, exactly, yeah. Well, it looks like it's so wonderful on television, doesn't it? Seeing the famous people, they look so happy on the telly, you know, but behind the scenes, it's maybe quite different, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, sports people tend to do better because they're not, you know, they're quite disciplined people. But it's more like the pop stars and actors who tend to overdo it on the sensual level and creates problems for them. And then they get into drugs and things, and because of the results of the, you know, sensuality, whatever, starts to get the best of them, you know, and then they have to go for drugs and rehabilitation and, yeah.
I think quite a few are famous for their fat attitude.
Yes, yeah, well, exactly, yeah, yeah. Well, it doesn't give rise to wisdom, really, does it? Yeah, no.
I'm glad that you know Buddhism, because sometimes, from time to time, we also fall into that trap want to be famous, want to be rich, want to have lots of power.
Yes.
Because of the Buddha's teaching, we can change our mind and be happy with what we are.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. But, you know, if you were to say, who's the happiest person you ever met, who would it be? Well, you know, I mean, you know, meeting Luang Por Chah, I mean, he was such a joyful being, you know. I mean, I thought, well, if that's the results of, you know, that's why he's encouraging. But we see the happiness of somebody who's let go of defilements. And realise that is the best happiness, really. It's not, but of course, it's not the easiest. You know, it takes work and practice. You know, it's not an easy path. But you realise the benefits of somebody who's done it, who's done the work. Yeah, so that can encourage us. But the world is always saying to us, happiness comes from having more material things, bigger houses, bigger this, better this, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
How do we make sure that next life we continue to be a Buddhist and practicing Dhamma?
Or keep practicing this life. Yeah, yeah. Because we create karmic affinities, you know. And yeah, and it'll just in the next life, as soon as you hear the Buddha's teaching, if you really practiced it, it'll just click like that, you know? And you'll be straight back in again.
It shows us he's scared of the things now.
Huh? And we create like karmic affinities. So if we develop a lot of wholesome mind states, then we tend to be, that will gravitate us towards wholesome people in our next life. That's always the quality of our mind will gravitate us towards certain types of people and situations. And then of course if we have developed some wisdom in this life, some insight, then of course when we hear the teachings, we'll be there, oh. Yeah, yeah.
And then I was just thinking what Ajahn was saying about how we create in the future, right? We can see in the present life, alcoholics go with alcoholics, smokers go with smokers, gangsters go with
Exactly, yeah.
gravitate towards the same.
Yeah.
And you can see that.
Yeah. I mean, there's sort of a Jataka story about two twins, and they get separated. One ends up living with good people, one ends up living with criminals. And the different ways these two twins developed, So the one became a bad person, the one became a good person, but the influence of the things around them.
I understand that if we don't become a Suttapana, there's still a danger of us falling into the willful plane next life.
I mean, that's the theory, but I think if we cultivate some virtue, if we have virtue, then no, it's not. We won't go into a lower realm. It's only people who are really heedless and foolish that go into lower realms. If we have 5 precepts guaranteed, human or above.
But again, it comes back to the last moment of our life, right? Until that's the decision point, right? When we have the last moment in life, at the period of time, we decide our next life.
Yeah, I mean, even I've heard this not from even Buddhist point of view. People say in the last moments, the whole life seems to go through that. And of course, if one has done a lot of wholesome things in that life and gained some wisdom, of course, it'll be something good. There'll bring peace to the mind, and of course, that quality of peace will gravitate us towards a wholesome rebirth. Now, if we've just been a criminal, killing, stealing, that all goes to our mind. Fear will come up, then down you go. Yeah. Mm. So everybody here, don't worry, you'll be all right.
We have your blessing.
Yeah, you're all okay. You got my. You signed the wholesome contract. For a favourable rebirth.
Can we have it in writing?
Just, I'm afraid you're just going to have to take my word on it.
I have family relatives in Melbourne. So when will you be in Melbourne?
From next Friday. Well, next Saturday, really. I'll be there for the Waisak, if they come for Waisak. I'll be joined, because Waisak is on Sunday, the 16th, 15th, 16th. So I'll be there for the Waisak celebration. But I'll be there, I'll be there like the meal time from the 6th to the 16th or something like that. And then after that, I'm going to Adelaide after that.
So your trip, the purpose of your trip this time is to go around Australia to visit all of the...
Yes, while I'm here, I visit the monasteries, yeah. I've got lots of friends, and I mean, Luang Por Kalyan I've known for many years, because we're like similar Vasa, There's a one Vasa difference, so every time I go to Thailand, I'll be sat next to him, and when he comes to England, sat next to him, even though he ordained in Thailand. We've become good friends over the years. And of course, 2 years ago, I got locked down in Melbourne for 8 months. My 6 weeks visit turned into 8 months. But it was fine.
So you don't have relatives in Australia?
No, not to my knowledge. Well, Dhamma brothers, my Kalyanamitta.
Thank you for coming to visit our monastery.
Well, I was going to come here 2 years ago, but of course the pandemic I couldn't come, so this time I was able to come and visit. Yeah. Anyway, if you're ever in the UK, please, Chithurst, very nice monastery, very beautiful nature. Please do come and visit if you're sure some of you have got relatives in the UK as well. Yeah.
How many monks do you have at your monastery?
At the moment, about 9, but for the Vasa, we will have about, well, with monks and novices, will be all 20, 21. And then we have also 3 nuns at the nuns' cottage as well. We have a nuns' community too. Yeah.
Is the forest that got donated to the English Sangha Trust, is it just next door? Is it?
Yes, just down the lane. It's not actually adjoining to the monks, to the main house and where the monks stay, but down the lane we have 2 cottages that are used by the nuns and laywomen, and that's right on the edge of the forest. So it's not far away, just a 5-minute walk, 10-minute walk.
Do the monastic use the forest, or what's the forest for?
We built meditation huts in the forest. We've got about 10 meditation huts, and we use it for retreats. Yeah, yeah.
I didn't know you can develop anything in the forest.
Yeah, well, you can't. You can't build houses and things, but you can build meditation huts. They allow you to do that. Yeah.
Do monks use that forest for Uganda? Monks wander in the forest. What is the word for it? Dutanga? Do your monks use the forest?
Well, I think Dutanga sometimes more wandering out and staying in forest. Like we go Tudong. Yeah, Tudong is the Thai word, isn't it? Go Tudong. So when we go out the monastery, we go into the towns for Bindabat, then stay in a forest, then go to the next town for Bindabat, stay in another forest. And certain sort of renunciation practices also associated with Dutanga, maybe just having one meal a day, not having breakfast. Certain extra bits of renunciation can be like Dutanga practices. But Tudong generally is going wandering, which is generally, when you go wandering, generally you don't have breakfast. You just go into town, have your meal, and that's it. Then go on to the next place. England's very good for Tudong. Australia, two big distances between places, unless you're Superman. In England, the towns like 7-10 miles apart. So it's easy to walk between towns. But Australia, places are miles apart, aren't they? But some have done it, but it's not as easy as in the UK. I mean, it's okay if you're taking like an anagarika or a samanera who can keep food overnight, but bhikkhus alone can't keep food overnight. So we have to go bindabat every day and live on the food we get on bindabata. Yeah, I do it. I usually do it every year for 2 weeks. Yeah. Well, I've never done Tudong in Thailand. I've done it in England often. Yeah, every year I do it. Yeah, I did it last year, 2 weeks. I walked from the monastery to Kent, which is over a period of 2 weeks, and I stay in forest, go bindabat into the towns, and it's very good. People offer food. Yeah.
So people in England don't see monks as strange.
Oh, some do. Yeah, some do. But one thing in the UK, Dalai Lama's very much been in the media over the years, and he puts a good people a lot of respect for the Dalai Lama and what he teaches. So when you see Buddhist monks now, we get quite well received because they understand about harmlessness, peacefulness, ahimsa, not harming, and so that's been helpful too. Buddhism has quite a good reputation in the UK as being, not starting wars in the name of Buddhism and harm, peacefulness.
Because we watch a
Yes.
when the neighbors were not really happy at that time.
Yeah.
We have a Buddhist monastery there when they are all Anglicans or.
Yes. Yeah.
Have they changed?
Oh, yes, changed now. Yeah. Yeah. And you know, in those days too, the Hare Krishna movement was very popular. And you know, Hare Krishna, they dance around and chant and make a lot of noise. So they had the image of us dancing and singing on their quiet country lanes. But when they begin to know how we lived, then they begin to be more accept us. Now we've been there longer than our neighbours, so they can't complain. 40 odd years now we're probably the longest people there on the lane now. All our neighbours have changed over the years, except for one or two. Yeah. But of course, some people are a little bit cautious about things that are new, and especially the news, it reports all these cults and all these things that happen with these cults, so think, oh, another cult, and what they're going to do, what's going to happen, They don't realise it's an established religious convention. In somewhere like Thailand, it's a very respectable religious convention. And but people adapted, and some people became very good friends in the monastery too. Mm. But I think the monastery is the longest, probably the longest residence on the lane now. Yeah.
Mentioning the Dalai Lama, does Theravada Buddhism have any relationship with Tibetan Buddhism at all?
I mean, we sometimes have visited Tibetan monasteries, and Tibetan monks have visited our monastery. When I was in New Zealand, I think in the year 1990, His Holiness the Dalai Lama came to New Zealand. We were a part of the organisation committee, together with the Tibetan centre down in the South Island. And we had a meeting at Bodhinyana with a very nice Tibetan monk called Geshe Dage, who's now passed away, to try and arrange things for His Holiness's visit. And the only reason he couldn't come to Stokes Valley because he was political leader, and it's in a valley, and they think, well, there could be snipers up there and things. So we couldn't invite him to our monastery, but if I'm sure he would have been happy to come. So we just had to meet His Holiness at different meetings and different venues and things. Yeah.
When he came to the Sunshine Coast, he went to the zoo, the Australian Zoo.
Yeah. If it's well, probably I don't know if he was. Now he's not political leader, so maybe there's not the same protocols around him. Now he gave up being political leader, but back in 1990 he was the political leader, so there's certain protocols about where he went and safety and things. Yeah. Well, I think we've had our session now. Are you okay? Your questions okay? Yeah, okay, you're okay for now? Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's good. Well, no, it's good to question these things, and that's how we learn, isn't it? Asking questions and things. Okay.